The ring box felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my pocket as I stood there on the cliff edge, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Behind me, hidden among the trees, our friends and family waited with bated breath. Everything had led to this moment, every heartbreak, every wrong turn, every second chance. If you've ever felt your entire future balanced on the edge of a single question, then you already know part of my story. Before we dive into how I ended up on that cliff with the love of my life, wondering if I was about to soar or plummet, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for stories like these that remind us all why love, despite everything, is always worth the risk. Eliza and I didn't have a meet-cute. There was no coffee shop encounter, no bumping into each other at a bookstore while reaching for the same novel. We met at my lowest point, when I had nothing left to give. I was 32, freshly divorced from a marriage that had lasted barely 2 years, and sleeping on my brother's couch. My ex-wife had walked away with half of everything I owned and all of my self-confidence. The startup I'd poured 5 years of my life into had collapsed spectacularly, leaving me with nothing but debt and a reputation as a failure in an industry that worshipped success. Eliza was my brother's colleague, a trauma nurse with eyes that had seen too much death but somehow still sparkled when she laughed. She came over for dinner one night, not expecting to find a broken man in sweatpants eating cereal straight from the box while watching reruns of shows I'd already seen a dozen times. "So you're the infamous James," she said, not a hint of judgment in her voice as she plopped down next to me on the couch. "I hear you make a mean lasagna." I looked at her sideways, milk dribbling down my chin. That was before. Before what? Before I realized the universe has a personal vendetta against me. She laughed then, not unkindly, but with a warmth that made me feel seen for the first time in months. "The universe isn't that organized," she said. "Trust me, I've watched people survive things they shouldn't have and die from things they should have walked away from. There's no pattern. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't even attraction. It was something quieter, something that felt like recognition. Here was someone who understood that sometimes life breaks you down to nothing, and that's okay." Over the next few weeks, she kept showing up. Not for dinner with my brother, but with takeout just for me. I was in the neighborhood, she'd say, even though I knew she lived across town. We'd eat Thai food or pizza or whatever she'd brought, and talk about everything and nothing. She never asked about my ex or my failed business unless I brought it up. Instead, she told me about her patients, about the lives she saved and the ones she couldn't. She showed me what real courage looked like. "You need to get out of this apartment," she said one day, 3 months into our strange friendship. "Your beard has achieved sentience and is planning a coup." I ran a hand over my unkempt face. Where would I go? Anywhere. Everywhere. Just not here, marinating in self-pity and box wine. That stung, but only because it was true. The next day, I shaved, put on real clothes, and applied for a job at a local community college teaching business courses. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't what I'd dreamed of, but it was something. When I got the position, Eliza was the first person I called. "We're celebrating," she declared. "I'm taking you to dinner. A real restaurant with cloth napkins and everything." It was at that dinner, watching her talk passionately about a new procedure she was learning, that I realized I was falling for her. The realization terrified me. I wasn't ready. I was still healing, still figuring out who I was without my ex-wife, without my company. Eliza deserved better than a work in progress. So I did what any emotionally stunted man would do, I pulled away. I stopped answering her texts right away. I made excuses about being busy with the new job. I convinced myself I was doing her a favor. A month later, she showed up at my door, fury blazing in her eyes. "What the hell, James?" "I've been busy," I said lamely. "Bullshit. You're scared. And that's fine, but you don't get to decide for me what I can handle." She pushed past me into the apartment I'd finally rented on my own. I deal with life and death every day. I know what matters and what doesn't. And you matter to me, you idiot. We stayed up all night talking. I told her everything, my fears, my insecurities, how I was terrified of failing again. She listened, really listened, then took my hands in hers. Everybody fails, she said simply. The trick is finding someone worth failing with. Our first kiss tasted like dawn and possibility. We took things slow, both of us carrying baggage from past relationships. Eliza had her own scars, a fiancé who'd cheated, parents who'd divorced messily when she was a teenager, a childhood spent moving from place to place as an army brat. We were careful with each other, gentle with our broken places. 6 months into our relationship, we hit our first major obstacle. Eliza was offered a prestigious position at a hospital in Chicago, a dream opportunity that would advance her career significantly. The thought of doing long distance after we just found each other was devastating, but I couldn't ask her to stay. I wouldn't be the reason she gave up on her dreams. "I'll go with you," I said one night, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess them. She looked at me, surprise evident in her expression. "What about your job? Your brother? The life you've rebuilt here?" "You're more important," I said simply. "I can teach anywhere. I can make friends anywhere. But what we have, that's rare." The look on her face was worth every ounce of uncertainty I felt. "Are you sure?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been more sure of anything." Moving to Chicago tested us in ways we couldn't have anticipated. The winter was brutal, the city overwhelming. My job search took longer than expected, and the strain of financial uncertainty brought out old insecurities. Eliza worked long hours at the hospital, often coming home too exhausted to do more than collapse into bed. We fought, about money, about time, about the dishes piling up in the sink because we were both too tired to deal with them. One particularly bad night, after a screaming match about something so trivial I can't even remember it now, I stormed out of our apartment. I walked for hours in the bitter cold, questioning everything. Had I made a mistake? Were we kidding ourselves, thinking we could make this work? I found myself at the shore of Lake Michigan, watching the moonlight dance across the frozen surface. A couple walked past, elderly, holding mittened hands and laughing softly together. I wondered how many fights they'd had, how many times they'd questioned everything, how many winters they'd weathered together. When I returned home, Eliza was sitting on the couch, eyes red from crying. "I thought you weren't coming back," she said, voice small. I sat beside her, took her hand. "I'll always come back to you. That's the point. We can fight and hurt each other and make mistakes, but at the end of the day, this, us, is where I want to be." We made changes after that night. I found a teaching position at a local college. Eliza requested a more sustainable schedule. We implemented date nights, no matter how tired we were. We learned to fight better, not less, but with more understanding, more willingness to see each other's perspective. 2 years passed. We built a life together in Chicago, found our favorite coffee shops, made friends, adopted a one-eyed cat named Captain. We traveled when we could, taking weekend trips to nearby cities and one memorable vacation to Costa Rica where we both got terribly sunburned but couldn't stop smiling anyway. It was during a trip back to our hometown to visit family that I decided it was time. We'd been through enough, the highs, the lows, the in-betweens, to know that what we had was real and lasting. I bought the ring with my brother's help, a simple emerald because Eliza had once mentioned she found diamonds, clinically perfect but lacking character. I planned everything meticulously, too meticulously, according to my brother. "She's going to know something's up if you keep acting this weird," he warned. He was right. The day of my planned proposal, as we hiked up to the cliff that had been our special spot during those early days of takeout and tentative friendship, Eliza kept giving me strange looks. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked. You're sweating a lot for February. Just excited about the view, I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. The view from the cliff was spectacular, especially at sunset, which was precisely why I'd chosen it. As we reached the summit, I was so nervous I nearly tripped over my own feet. The box in my pocket felt impossibly heavy, like it might drag me over the edge of the cliff entirely. What if she said no? What if, despite everything we'd been through, she wasn't ready for this step? The sun began its descent, painting the sky in breathtaking hues of gold and crimson. It was time. I turned to face her, taking in her wind-blown hair, her cheeks pink from the cold, her eyes curious and maybe a little concerned about my strange behavior. Eliza, I began, my voice cracking embarrassingly. I cleared my throat and tried again. Eliza. When we met, I was at my lowest point. I had nothing to offer anyone, least of all someone as extraordinary as you. But you saw something in me worth saving. Her eyes widened as realization dawned. James. Please let me finish or I might pass out, I said, drawing a shaky laugh from both of us. You taught me that failure isn't final, that starting over isn't giving up, that love isn't about finding someone perfect but about finding someone worth imperfection with. I dropped to one knee then, my hands trembling as I pulled out the ring box. I don't know what challenges we'll face in the future. I don't know what storms we'll have to weather. But I know I want to face them with you. I want to build a life with you, messy and imperfect and completely ours. I opened the box, revealing the emerald ring that had been burning a hole in my pocket and my mind for weeks. I nervously asked, "Will you be my wife?" Time seemed to stop as I waited for her answer. In that suspended moment, every doubt I'd ever had came rushing back. Had I misread everything? Was this too soon? Too much? And then she smiled, that warm, wonderful smile that had first made me feel seen all those years ago, and said, "I thought you'd never ask." Behind us, emerging from their hiding spots among the trees, our friends and family erupted in cheers and applause. Eliza's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with tears as she spotted her parents, who had flown in secretly from Arizona for the occasion. As I slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, she leaned in close and whispered, "You know, I bought a ring for you too. I was going to propose next month on your birthday if you didn't beat me to it." And that, perhaps, was the perfect summation of our relationship. Two people, both a little broken, both a little afraid, but both brave enough to choose each other again and again, even when it wasn't easy. Especially when it wasn't easy. Our wedding, 6 months later, wasn't a grand affair but rather an intimate gathering of the people who had supported us through everything. My brother was my best man, Eliza's childhood friend was her maid of honor. Captain the One-Eyed Cat served as ring bearer, carrying the rings on a small pillow attached to his collar and performing his duties with surprising dignity. We wrote our own vows, promising not a life free of storms but to be each other's shelter when they came. We promised honesty, even when it hurt, patience, even when it was hard, and love, especially then. Life after the wedding wasn't perfect. We still fought about dishes and budgets and whose turn it was to scoop the litter box. Eliza's hospital schedule still sometimes left her too exhausted for date night. My insecurities still occasionally reared their ugly heads. But we had built something beautiful together, a partnership that could weather the storms because we'd already survived so many. We'd learned that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments, but about choosing each other every day, in all the small ways that add up to a lifetime. 3 years after our wedding, as we prepared to welcome our first child into the world, I found myself returning to that cliff edge where I'd proposed. Eliza, 8 months pregnant and radiant, insisted on making the hike despite my concerns. "Some things are worth the effort," she said, echoing words I'd spoken years before. At the summit, watching another magnificent sunset, I wrapped my arms around her from behind, my hands resting on the swell of her belly where our daughter occasionally kicked with surprising strength. "Are you scared?" she asked, leaning back against me. "Terrified," I admitted. "What if I'm not good at this?" What if I make all the wrong choices? She turned in my arms, looking up at me with the same warmth that had saved me all those years ago. Then we'll figure it out together. That's what we do. And she was right. That's exactly what we do, figure it out together, one day at a time, through every challenge and triumph, through every ordinary Tuesday and extraordinary milestone. We choose each other, again and again and again. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever taken a chance on love despite your fears, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share in the comments your own stories of love and courage, because in a world that can sometimes feel overwhelming, there's nothing more powerful than being reminded that connection is possible, that healing happens, and that love, in all its imperfect glory, is always worth the risk. Remember, it's not about finding someone who makes your life perfect. It's about finding someone who makes the imperfections bearable, even beautiful. Someone who stands with you on the cliff edge, looking out at an uncertain future, and says, whatever comes next, we face it together. Because in the end, that's what love truly is, not the absence of storms, but the certainty that you don't have to weather them alone.